Now we know that a program is a set of instructions that can make our computer perform a certain task for us. We also know that our programs can store data using variables. By doing the Hello World program and playing around with variables, we have learned a little bit about Python's syntax, which is just a set of rules that tell us how to type programs that Python can understand. You can think of it as the human languages having spelling and grammar rules to help us form correct sentences and words. So for example, whenever I was creating my variables, one of the syntax rules is that I need to put every statement or command in a single line. So for example, swords, when I was creating my variable swords, I had to go to the next line to do potions, and so on. The same is true when I was printing their values. I always had to go to the next line. If you don't do this, then Python will complain. So for example, if I try to print swords and potions in the same line, it complains that there is an invalid syntax. So also, when you create your statements, you need to be very careful with extra spaces. Python is really picky about spaces. So for example, if I press spacebar twice and then I try to print any of my variables, it says unexpected indent. So don't worry too much about this right now. All you need to know is that Python is really picky with spaces. We'll learn more about spaces, indent, and how to avoid these errors as we progress. Now, we have been talking about general syntax rules. When it comes to variables, we also have a certain number of rules that we need to follow. So for example, variables cannot include spaces. So something like this will result in an error. No spaces for variables. Also, variables cannot start with numbers. So you cannot create a variable like this. Next is variables cannot contain symbols other than underscore. So letters, numbers are okay, and underscore is also fine, but anything other, for example, my @gmail, will result in an error. So remember those three rules: no spaces, no numbers at the beginning, and only underscores allowed as special characters. So those are the main rules. There are other set of rules or considerations that you need to keep in mind. So for example, all programming languages are capitalization and spelling aware. So you need to be very careful with how you write your variables. So for example, the variable swords I own 5 is different from the variable swords with capital S I own. When I try to print this, it will complain that it's not defined because there is a capital S here and the one that I created doesn't have it. Also, any tiny spelling error that you make will also make Python complain. So if I try to print this, it also says it's not defined. So you need to use the exact case and spelling. Okay, next is, and this is a rule that will not cause any problem with Python, but that is something that programmers recommend you to follow, is when you name your variables, use a name that describes its purpose. So for example, if you're gonna create a variable that stores the number of swords that you own, then call it swords I own or just swords, but don't call it LOL. This doesn't make any sense. Or if you're storing a variable to hold the temperature of the room, then don't call it the, or don't call it A or B. So always use names that describe the purpose of the variable. And finally, this is a recommendation from Python developers. If your variable has multiple words, then separate them by an underscore. This is something called the snake case. So like in the case of swords I own or potions I want to collect. So if you want to create a variable called potions to collect, name it this way, potions to collect. So all lowercase and separate different words by an underscore. If it's just one word, then a lowercase word. If it's just one letter, then a lowercase letter. Some programmers also like to use what it's called camel case. It's also a good approach. So camel case follows the similar concept. If it's only one word, like potions, then lowercase. If it's only one letter, like X, then only lowercase x. But if it's multiple words, like potions to collect, then you separate them by making the first letter of the words that follow the first word uppercase. All right, so this is camel case. Together, snake case and camel case make your program easier to read and understand. So these are the considerations. Again, this will not, if you don't follow them, this will not cause any syntax error, but are good rules to follow in order to make your programs easier to understand for others, especially when they become larger. Okay, and this is it for the Python syntax rules.